Oh, I didn't know it.
You want to do it? You do.
I'm not very technologically savvy there when it comes to that sort of thing. And John gave all my good stuff away, so thanks a lot. All right, let me get started here. All right. Can you hear me? Is that good? Okay. Thank you all so much for coming. This is so exciting for me, and I'm so honored to be included, and I'm really touched that so many of you came, and so many friends came, and family members, and it really means a lot to me. I'm thrilled to talk about my favorite thing, which is writing and books. I love writing and books, my two favorite things. And thank you, John, for that introduction. And I expect you were involved in the invitation in the first place, so thank you for that. My husband wanted me to share some of my favorite reviews before I got started. So that's where I'm going to start. When I started writing 20 years ago, it was so rare to get a fan letter. I mean, my publisher would once in a while forward one to me. But this was a long time ago, you know, I'm old. So this was before, you know, email, before Twitter, before Facebook, before anything like that. And so it was rare that I would get a fan letter. But now it's a rare day that I don't get at least something, either a review or a couple of reviews up, or somebody contacting me on Facebook or something. And so it's wonderful. It's a little overwhelming sometimes, but these are a couple of my favorites recently from Amazon. So this one came in just last week. And it's from Carl the One-Man Band. This is an Amazon review. He gave Snow Angel Cove 3 stars and said, "These books must be pretty good. I can't really rate them." Yet he did. They are books my wife orders on my account, but she spends a lot of time reading them in the reading room, so I would say they must be good reads. I got Carl the One-Man Band on my side. Somebody else who reviewed The Christmas Ranch, and she gave it 1 star, but she said, "I didn't like Jane. She was selfish and cowardly. And that would really upset me as an author, except there is no Jane character in that book." So. And I do get some really lovely reviews. Those are some of the funny ones. I get even funnier ones sometimes, but mostly they're very, very lovely reviews and really touching. Last week I got another one. It was a 5-star review from Susan for Blackberry Summer, and she says, "In my own life, I have been dealing with huge losses. Claire and her friends helped me to see that there might be a positive change in all of this grief." Whoops, I just lost an earring. Sorry. Sorry. She says, let's see. "Hopefully I can believe soon as Claire did that God does have a larger plan for me also." My favorite was from a teenage girl several years ago who wrote me an email and said she used to hate to read, but she read my book Free Fall and loved it so very much that now she reads all the time. So that was just such a wonderful thing for me as an author because I love books so much. So today I have chosen to read from my book, Christmas in Snowflake Canyon. That's the one I'm going to read from. This is my book that came out last Christmas, and it has a really special place in my heart. First of all, it was my first book to hit the New York Times, so I was so excited about that. I spent 3 weeks on the New York Times. So that alone made it meaningful to me. But also I loved it because this opening scene is one of my favorites. I love the hero and heroine in this. I love their story. I never intended to write the story of this heroine. She appeared in one of my early books in the series, and she was sort of an she wasn't an antagonist, but I provided her just to show how nice the heroine was. She was a foil for that heroine because she was this prissy society belle, bridezilla, and so I needed to show how nice my heroine was in that book. So I introduced this character called Genevieve Beaumont, and she was just not a nice person, but through the course of the first 3 books, some bad things happened to her, and when I originally intended that series to only be, originally it was going to be only 3 books, but my publisher loved it, the readers responded to it, so I decided to write 3 more, and I was trying to think, who else could I write about? And I knew the hero was going to be Dylan Kane, who was a Wounded War veteran, and it seemed just so perfect to me that I put him with Genevieve Beaumont, this person who is all about appearances and seems so shallow, but really there's much more to her than meets the eye. And I love their opening scene. So I also have to add a little disclaimer that I write in deep POV point of view, and this scene is from the hero's point of view. He's a former Army Ranger who's recovering from severe injuries in Afghanistan. So I'm sorry, he's not going to say darn or golly. So the language gets a little bit salty. I'm going to tone it down a little, but...
That's okay, RaeAnne. We're uncensored.
Okay. All right.
Ratchet it up a little.
All right. All right, so here we go. And it is my first reading, so we'll see how this goes. And I'm using my Kindle or my iPad because I don't have the best eyes anymore, so I can blow it up big. All right. If he had to listen to the little drummer boy one more time, he was going to bum somebody right in the gut. Dylan Kane huddled over a whiskey at the crowded bar of the Speckled Lizard, about 2 seconds and one more damn Christmas carol away from yanking the jukebox plug out of the wall. Some idiot had just played 3 versions of the same song. If another one flipped, he was going to knock a few heads and then take off. His brother was now, he checked his watch, 10 minutes late. The way Dylan figured, it would serve Jamie right if he bailed. He hadn't wanted to meet at the bar in the first place, and he certainly wasn't in any mood to sit here by himself, listening to a bad version of a song he'd never liked much in the first place. On this, the evening of Black Friday, the Liz was hopping. A popular local band was supposed to be playing, but from the buzz he'd heard around the bar, apparently the bass player and the lead singer, married to each other, had shared a bad Thanksgiving tofurkey the day before, and were too busy yakking it up to entertain the masses. Those masses were now growing restless. He no longer liked crowds under the best of circumstances, and a bar filled with holiday-edgy, disappointed music fans with liberal access to alcohol struck him as an unpleasant combination. Somebody jostled him from behind, and he could tell without turning around it was a woman. The curves pressing into his shoulder were a good giveaway, along with the delectable scent of cinnamon and vanilla that made him think of crisp, rich cookies. His mouth watered. He'd been a hell of a long time without cookies. Pat, where's my mojito? Come on, I've been waiting forever. The woman with the husky voice squeezed past him to lean against the bar, and from the side he caught only an equally sexy, sleek fall of blonde hair. She was wearing a white sweater that was about half an inch too short, and when she leaned over, just a strip of pale skin showed above the waistline of a pair of jeans that highlighted a shapely rear. The longtime Lizard bartender frowned, his wind-chapped face wrinkling around the mouth. It's coming, I'm short-handed. Stupid me, I figured when the band canceled, nobody would show up. Give me a sec, have some pretzels or something. I don't want pretzels, I want another mojito. She'd obviously already had a mojito or 3, judging by the careful precision of her words. The peremptory tone struck a chord. He looked closer and suddenly recognized the alluring handful, Genevieve Beaumont, spoiled and precious daughter of the Hopes Crossing mayor. She was quite a bit younger than he was, maybe 6 years or so. He didn't know her well, only by reputation, which wasn't great. He had always figured her for a prissy little society belle, the kind of vapid, boring woman who wastes her life on a solemn quest for the perfect manicure. She didn't look it now. Instead, she looked a little tousled, slightly buzzed, and oddly delicious. If somebody plays another stupid Christmas carol, I swear I'm going to scream. This is a freaking bar, not Sunday school. Hear, hear, he murmured, unable to hold back his wholehearted agreement. She finally deigned to pay attention to anything but herself. She shifted her gaze, and in her heavily lashed blue eyes, he saw a quick, familiar reaction, a mangle of pity and something akin to fascinated repugnance. Yeah, he hated crowds. To her credit, she quickly hid her response and instead offered a stiff smile. Dylan Kane, I didn't see you there. He gave her a polite smile in return. Completely out of unwarranted malevolence, he lifted what remained of his left arm in a caricature of a wave, most of me anyway. She swallowed and blinked, but didn't lose that stiff smile. If anything, it seemed to beam unnaturally, like a blinking string of Christmas lights. Nice to see you again, she said. He couldn't remember ever having a conversation with the woman in his life. If he had, he certainly would have recalled that husky voice that thrummed through him, as rich and heady as his Johnny Walker. Same, he said, which wasn't completely a lie. He did enjoy that little strip of bare skin and a pair of tight jeans. Are you visiting your family for the holidays, she asked. Polite conversation apparently drilled into her, along with proper posture and perfect accessory coordination, even when she was slightly drunk. Nope, he took a sip of his whiskey. I moved back in the spring. I've got a place up Snowflake Canyon. Oh, I hadn't heard. She focused on a point somewhere just above his right ear, though he noticed her gaze flicking briefly, almost against her will, to the eye patch that concealed a web of scar tissue before she jerked it away. He fought the urge to check his watch again, or, to hell with Jamie, to toss a bill on the bar for his tab and take off. Though they certainly weren't society-conscious people like the Beaumonts, Dermot and Margaret Kane had drilled proper manners in him too. Every once in a while, he even used them. Don't think I've seen you around town since I've been back. Where are you living these days? Her mouth tightened and he noticed her lipstick had smeared ever so slightly on her lower lip. Until 3 days ago, I was living in a beautiful 5th floor flat in La Malais in Paris. Ooh la la, La Malais. Like that was supposed to mean anything to him. Somebody should really do something about that music, she complained to Pat before Dylan could answer. Why would you put so many stupid versions of the same song on the jukebox? The bartender looked frazzled as he pulled another beer from the tap. I had to spring for that stupid digital jukebox. Worst business decision of my life. It's completely ruined the place. It's like karaoke every night. Here's a little secret you might not know. We have a crap load of people in Hope's Crossing with lousy taste in music. You could always take it out, Dylan suggested. Believe me, I'm tempted every night, but I paid a fortune for the thing. Usually I end up forking over some of my tips and picking my own songs. He finally set a pink mojito in front of Genevieve. She picked it up and took a healthy sip. Thank you, she said, her sexy voice incongruously prim, then gave Dylan that polite, empty smile. Excuse me. He watched her head in the direction of the gleaming jukebox, wondering what sort of music she would pick. Probably something artsy and annoying. It better not be anything with an accordion. He checked his watch, which he really hated wearing on his right arm after a lifetime of it on the left. Jamie was now 15 minutes late. That was about his limit. Just as he was reaching into his pocket for his wallet, his phone buzzed with an incoming text. As he expected, it was from Jamie, crisp and succinct. Sorry, got held up. On my way. Stay there. His just older brother knew him well. Jamie must have guessed that after all these months of solitude, the jostling crowd and discordant voices at the Speckled Lizard would be driving him crazy. He typed a quick response with one thumb. A pain in the ass, but not as bad as finger pecking an email. You've got 5. He meant it. If Jamie wasn't here by then, his brother could just drive up to Snowflake Canyon to share beer for his last night in town before returning to his base. The digital jukebox Pat hated switched to Jingle Bell Rock, a song Dylan disliked even more than the Little Drummer Boy. Sorry, the bartender said as he passed by on his way to hand a couple of fruity-looking drinks to a tourist pair a few stools down. Dylan glanced over at the flashing lights of the jukebox just in time to see Genevieve Beaumont head in that direction, mojito in hand. Uh-oh. More intrigued by a woman than he had been in a long time, he watched as she said something impassioned to the professionally dressed couple who seemed to be hogging all the music choices. He couldn't hear what she said over the loud conversation and clinking glasses wrapping around him, but he almost laughed at her dramatic, agitated gestures. So much for the prissy, buttoned-up debutante. Her arms slung wide as she pointed at the jukebox, and then back at the couple. From a little impromptu lip reading, he caught the words bar, idiot, and Christmas carols. The female half of the couple, a pretty redhead wearing a steel gray power suit and double strand of olive-sized pearls, didn't seem as amused as Dylan by Genevieve's freely given opinion. She said something in response that seemed as sharp as her shoes, judging by Genevieve's quick intake of breath. The woman brandished a credit card as if it was an AK-47 and hurried toward the digital piece of crap, probably to put in the Mormon Tabernacle Choir singing Away in a Manger or something else equally inappropriate for the setting. Dylan chuckled when, after a quick, startled second, the mayor's genteel daughter rushed forward like a Broncos tackle, her drink spilling a little as she darted ahead, her body blocking the woman from accessing the jukebox. Move your bony ass, he heard the woman say, quite unfairly in the personal opinion of a man who had just had ample evidence that particular piece of Miss Beaumont wasn't anything of the sort. Make me, Jen snarled. At that line in the sand declaration, Dylan did a quick 90-degree swivel on his bar stool to watch the unfolding action, and he realized he wasn't the only one. The little altercation was beginning to draw the interest of other patrons in the bar. Nothing like a good girl fight to get the guy's attention. I have the right to listen to whatever I want, Madam Powersuit declared. Nobody else wants to listen to Christmas music, am I right? A few nearby patrons offered vocal agreement, and the color rose in the redhead's cheeks. I do, she declared defiantly. Next time, bring your iPod and earbuds, Genevieve snapped. Next time, be the first one to the jukebox, and you can pick the music, the woman retorted, trying to sneak past Genevieve. She shoved at her, but couldn't budge her, again to Dylan's amusement, until the man who'd been sitting with the carol lover approached. He wore a dress shirt and loosened tie, but no jacket. He was a few years older than his companion. While he carried an air of authority, he also struck Dylan as similar to the bullies in the military who had no trouble pushing their weight around to get their way. Come on, that's enough, girls. What's the harm in a few Christmas carols? It's the day after Thanksgiving, after all. I believe this is between me and your girlfriend. She's not my girlfriend, she's my associate. I don't care if she's Mrs. Santa Claus. She has lousy taste in music, and everybody in the place has had enough. The other woman tried again to charge past Genevieve with her credit card, but Genevieve blocked access with her own body. Do you have any idea who you're messing with? He advanced on her, his very bulk making him threatening. Don't know, don't care. He loomed over her, but Genevieve didn't back down. She was just full of surprises. On face value, Dylan wouldn't have taken her for anybody with an ounce of pluck. She happens to be an assistant district attorney. We both are. Oh, crap. Genevieve apparently meant it when she said she didn't care. I hate attorneys. My ex-fiancé was an attorney, she snapped. The guy smirked. What's his name? I'd like to call a man and buy him a drink for being smart enough to drop-kick a psycho like you. Genevieve seemed to deflate a little, looking for a moment lost and uncertain before she bristled. I drop-kicked him, for your information, and I haven't missed him for a minute. In my experience, most attorneys will do anything necessary to get their way. You're right, the woman said. She planted her spiked heel on Genevieve's foot hard, and when the effort achieved its desired result, Genevieve shrieked in surprise and started to stumble. The woman tried to dart around her, but the former head cheerleader of Hope's Crossing High School still apparently had a few moves. She jostled with the woman and managed to slap away her hand while gripping the credit card before she could swipe it. That's assault, the woman declared. You saw that, didn't you, Larry? She just hit me. That wasn't a hit, that was a slap. Anyway, you started it. True story, a helpful bystander backed her up. The woman turned even more red in the face. Okay, this is ridiculous. Let her pass. Now, Larry the jerk reached for Genevieve's arm to yank her away from the jukebox. At the sight of that big hand on her white sweater, Dylan rose, his bar still squeaking as he shoved it back. Sit down, Kane, Pat urged, a pleading note in his voice. Dylan ignored him, adrenaline pumping through him like pure Scotch whiskey. He didn't necessarily like Genevieve Beaumont, but he hated bullies more. And she did have a nice ass. You're going to want to back down now, he said in his hardest former Army Ranger voice. The guy didn't release Genevieve's arm as he looked Dylan up and down, black eye patch and all. Aye, matey, or what? You'll stick your parrot on me? Dylan was vaguely aware of an audible hiss around him from locals who knew him. Something like that, he answered calmly. He reached out, and even with only one hand, he was able to deftly extricate Genevieve's arm from the man's hold and twist his fingers back. Thank you, she answered in surprise, straightening her sweater. You're welcome. He released the man's hand. I suggest we all go back to our drinks now. I'm calling the police, the woman blustered. You're crazy, both of you. Oh, shut up, Genevieve snapped. You shut up. You're both going to face assault charges. I might not be a lawyer, but I'm pretty sure that wasn't assault, Genevieve responded sharply. This is, Dylan hissed in a breath when Genevieve drew back a fist and smacked the woman dead center in her face. Blood immediately spurted from the woman's nose, and she jerked her hands up, shrieking, I think you just broke my nose. The contact of flesh on flesh seemed to shock Genevieve back to some semblance of sobriety. She blinked at the pair of them. Wow, I had no idea I could do that. I guess all those years of Pilates weren't completely wasted. The words were barely out of her mouth when the woman dropped her hands from her nose and lunged at her, and suddenly the two of them were seriously going at it. Kicking, punching, pulling hair. Why did they always have to pull hair? Dylan, with only one arm and skewed vision, was at a disadvantage as he reached into the squirming, tangled pair of women to try breaking things up. Larry, without a similar limitation, reached in from the other side, but the women jostled into him, and he stumbled backward, crashing into a big, tough-looking dude who fell to the floor and came up swinging. Everybody's nerves were apparently on edge tonight, what with dysfunctional family dinners, early morning shopping misery, puking sick musicians. Before he knew it, the guy's friends had entered into the fray, and what started as a minor altercation over Christmas carols erupted into a full-fledged, down-and-dirty bar fight involving tourists and locals alike. Dylan did his best to hold his own, but it was harder than he expected, much to his frustration. At one point, he found himself on the ground, just a few feet from the conveniently located jukebox power cord. He did everybody a favor and yanked it out before leaping to his feet again, just in time to see his brother wading into the middle of the fray, along with Pat and a 350-pound speckled lizard cook, Frankie Beltran, wielding a frying pan over her head. I can't leave you alone for a minute. Jamie grabbed him by the shirt and threw him away from the fight that was already abating. His own adrenaline surge had spiked apparently, leaving him achy and a little nauseous from the residual pain. He wiped at his mouth where one of the tourists, a big dude with dreads and a couple of tattoos, had thrown a punch that landed hard. There was another new discovery that sucked. A guy had a tough time blocking with his left when he didn't have one. If you'd been here on time, you could have joined in, he answered. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, hitting a wounded war hero. The woman who had started the whole thing had apparently turned her ire to the tourist who had punched him. Even though Pat tried to restrain Genevieve, she leveraged her way back against the bartender to kick out at the dreadlock snowboarder. He wasn't quite sure how he felt about Genevieve Beaumont trying to protect him. How the hell was I supposed to know he was a wounded war hero, the snowboarder complained. All I saw was some a-hole throwing punches at my friends. A commotion by the door to the tavern announced the arrival of two of Hope's Crossing's finest. The crowd parted for the uniformed officers, and Dylan's already queasy stomach took another turn. Two people he did not need to see. Oh, this wasn't going to end well. He had dated Officer Rachel Oliveris in high school a few times. If he remembered the details correctly, he'd broken up with her to date her sister, not one of his finer moments. If that wasn't enough, her partner Pete Redmond had lost his girlfriend to Dylan's older brother Drew. He doubted either one of them had a soft spot for the Canes. He should have remembered that particular joy of small-town life before he moved back. Everywhere a guy turned, he stumbled over hot, steaming piles of history. Rachel spoke first. What's our problem here, folks? Just a little misunderstanding. Jamie gave his most charming smile, but still holding tight to Dylan. Predictably, like anything without a Y chromosome, her lips parted, and she seemed to melt a little in the face of all Jamie's helicopter pilot mojo for just a moment before she went all stern cop again. They always are, she answered. Genevieve, didn't expect to see you here. You're bleeding. She said the last without a trace of sympathy, which didn't really surprise Dylan. Genevieve didn't have many friends in Hope's Crossing. Oh, for all her bravado earlier, her voice came out small, breathless. Rachel handed her a napkin off a nearby table, and Genevieve dabbed at her cheek, and her delicate skin seemed to turn as pale as the snowflakes he could see drifting past the open doorway. Rachel turned to him. You're bleeding too, she said, with no more sympathy. Oh, I think I've had worse, he said, unable to keep the dry note from his voice. This is all just a misunderstanding, right? Jamie aimed a hopeful, charmer of a grin at Rachel. No harm done, right? No harm done. The woman holding a wad of napkins to her still streaming nose practically screamed the words. She held up a hank of red hair Genevieve had pulled out from the roots, and for some strange reason, Dylan found that the most hilarious thing he'd seen in a long time. What do you mean, no harm done? I've got a court date Monday. How am I supposed to prosecute a case with a broken nose and half my hair missing? Why don't you shave the rest, Genevieve suggested. It can only be an improvement. It will save you a fortune on hairspray. Can you really be as stupid as you look? Larry shook his head. We're district attorneys. Do you have any idea what that means? We decide who faces criminal charges. Officers, I insist you arrest both of these people. Rachel didn't look thrilled about being ordered. On what charges, Mr. Kirk? Assault, disturbing the peace, drunken disorderly. How's that for starters? It was just a bar fight, Jamie protested. The same thing happens a couple times a week here at the Lizard. Isn't that right, Pat? Don't bring me into this, the bartender protested. So are you pressing charges, Miss Turner? Officer Edmund asked. Look at my nose. Of course I'm pressing charges. Pat? The bartender looked around. Well, somebody needs to pay for these damages. It might as well be Mayor Beaumont. Oh, that's so unfair, Genevieve exclaimed. If you hadn't bought that stupid digital jukebox, none of this would have happened. You probably want to keep your mouth shut right about now, Dylan suggested. I'll pay for the damages. He ignored Jamie's rumble of protest. That's all I care about, Pat answered, reaching out and shaking Dylan's hand firmly, the deal done. Kane is right. We have bar fights in here a couple times a week. As long as somebody replaces those broken tables, I won't press charges. Doesn't matter whether you press charges or not. You still have to arrest and book them for assault, the assistant district attorney said. Sorry, Dylan, Miss Beaumont, but I'm going to have to take you in. Despite her words, Rachel didn't sound at all apologetic. You can't do that, Genevieve exclaimed. Rachel tapped the badge on her chest. This sort of says I can. The officer reached around and started handcuffing Genevieve. With all her blonde hair, silky white sweater, and that little stream of blood trickling down her cheek, she looked like a fallen Christmas angel. Stop this, right now, she said, all but stamping her foot in frustration. You can't arrest me. My father will never allow it. Believe it or not, there are still a few things around Hope's Crossing William Beaumont can't control. Like most of the rest of the town, it sounded as if Rachel had had a run-in or two with Mayor Beaumont, who tended to think he owned the town. Why aren't you arresting her? She demanded with a gesture to the assistant district attorney. She's the one who wouldn't stop playing these stupid songs on the jukebox, and I think she broke my foot with that hideous shoe. Rachel seemed unaffected as she turned her around and started reciting her Miranda rights. Her partner turned his attention to Dylan. Turn around and place your hands behind your back, Pete ordered. I'll do my best, officer, Dylan answered. He twisted his right arm behind his back and the left with the empty sleeve as far as he could. Dylan, Jamie chided. Redmond apparently realized the challenge. Oliveris, what am I supposed to do here? Rachel paused amid Miranda and looked at her partner in annoyance that quickly shifted to more of that damn pity when she looked at Dylan. You could always let me go, he suggested, fighting down the urge to punch something all over again. I was only coming to the rescue of a damsel in distress. What's the harm in that? Or not, she snapped, and before he realized what she intended, he reached for the cuff. She reached for the cuff on Jan's left wrist and fastened the other side onto his right. Oh joy, shackled to Genevieve Beaumont. Could he stoop any lower? You can't do this, she exclaimed again. I've never been arrested before. I can't believe this is happening, all because of some stupid Christmas carols. I like Christmas carols, Rachel said. So do I, Genevieve answered hotly. Believe me, I do. But not on a Friday night when I only wanted a few drinks and some good music. You can explain that to the judge, I'm sure. Come on, let's go. She headed for the door, pushing her still protesting prisoner ahead of her. Dylan, by default, had to go with them. When she opened the door, a blast of wind and snow whirled inside, harsh and mean. He was aware of Genevieve's sudden shiver beside him, and some latent protective instinct bubbled out of nowhere. It's freezing out there. At least let the woman put on her coat. Rachel raised an eyebrow at him, as surprised as he was by the solicitude. Genevieve apparently didn't even notice. That's right, I can't leave without my coat. And my purse. Where's my purse? I'll get them, Jamie offered. Where are they? Pete asked. I was sitting over there. She gestured toward her table. It seemed a lifetime ago that she had pressed her chest against his shoulder so she could bug Pat about a mojito. My coat should be hanging on the rack. It's Dior. You can't miss it. Jamie found the coat and purse quickly and handed them over. I can't say this is how I expected to spend my last night of life. Sorry. No worries. I'll call Andrew. He'll have you out in an hour or two. The only thing worse than the lecture in store for him from Pop would be the similar one their older brother would likely deliver. If they send me to the big house, take care of Tucker for me, will you? Jamie threw him a look of disgust. This isn't a joke, damn it. You're under arrest. These are serious charges. It was just a bar fight. Drew can handle that in his sleep. On second thought, Charlotte can take care of Tuck. He likes it at her place. His brother shook his head. You're insane. He must be. Despite the indignity of being shackled to Genevieve Beaumont and hauled out through the biting snow to the waiting patrol car, Dylan was astonished to discover he was enjoying himself more than he had in a long, long time. It can only go uphill from here, right? Okay, so I prepared a few things, but I don't know if we want to just ask questions or what do you think?
I think you should give what you prepared, and then we'll ask some questions.
Okay, that's what I will do. Okay, so John kind of explained my journey into journalism first. That's sort of how I became a writer, and how all the time I was in journalism and going on stories and being an editor, I wanted to write a romance novel. And I want to talk about dreams, lessons I learned about following your dreams, and all that time I dreamed about writing a novel, and so here's a few things that I learned along the way. The first lesson I learned was protect your dreams and never believe anybody who tells you it's stupid. I wanted to write a romance novel, but I learned to be very careful about who I shared that dream with. Not everybody saw, as John said, I believe the life-affirming power of these books like I did. And it was easy to let that negativity influence me. I love romances, unapologetically. My mother adored romantic suspense. She adored authors like Phyllis Whitney and Madeline Brent, Mary Stewart, Elizabeth Peters. She introduced me to these authors when I was young. And I discovered through that, it was sort of a springboard, and I discovered authors like Georgette Heyer and Claire Darcy. And from there I discovered Harlequin romances. And I loved reading about happy endings, about two people who find each other through all the difficult obstacles that have been thrown in their path, and about the healing power of love. And that's the kind of story I wanted to tell. I had no idea where to start. I knew how to write a nonfiction story. I had no idea how to write fiction. I'd never had a class. I didn't know anything. So I came to the library, this library in fact, and I checked out every book they had on how to write fiction. And I read them, and I decided, well, one day I'm going to start and write a book. And that was sort of what my dream was, to write a book. I never thought that I would one day be finishing my 49th book. But I wanted to write one book. And so my husband and I bought a computer at a bid sale at USU for $100. And this was quite a computer, let me tell you. It's this was back in like 1989, 1990, and it had a floppy drive that booted up the computer, and then another floppy drive that you saved your work on. And so but $100 was a lot of money at the time. And so finally I had a computer. I was working at the Herald-Journal as a newspaper reporter. I was pregnant with our first child, and I said, while I'm on maternity leave, I'm gonna write a book. I was gonna have 6 to 8 weeks off when I had this baby, and I thought I'm gonna just get started because I have a new baby and she's gonna sleep once in a while. That was my. And she did. That is when I started, because she did sleep once in a while, not all that often, but she did sleep once in a while. So around that time, again, I wrote 25 pages. I think that's probably all I got done while I had her on maternity leave, and they were horrible. And as I look back, they were so awful, those first things I wrote. But through that, I was interested in it. I put the word out there and found out about a romance writing conference that was in Salt Lake City. And so I thought, well, I'll attend this for the day. I'll go to this conference. And I hooked up with some other people that were in Brigham City, and we started a critique group. And that was like the absolute best thing that could have happened to me, because these were people who were no further along in the journey than I was, but they were other writers, and I just loved talking to other writers who knew about fiction and creating characters and developing plot and that sort of thing. And we had a wonderful time. And so that's the second lesson I learned about following your dreams, is to be willing to accept help along the way. We need each other. That's the core message of all of my books, is that we're all here to learn how to take care of each other. No matter what the storyline is, that seems to be the lesson that everybody has to come up with in the end. And I had to learn that as well with my critique group. I remember the first time I read 10 pages to them, I was more scared than I could tell you to read this fiction to them. But it was an amazing experience to hear people laugh at the right moments. And like tonight, that's amazing to me, that people enjoy what I write. And the letters that I get, the emails I get, it just is overwhelming to me. But I can remember reading that aloud to them and hearing them have that response that I wanted at the right moment. And they liked my stuff, and they gave me the confidence to submit it to a publisher. This was, again, remember, back in 1990, 91, well before any internet ever came along, except in Al Gore's mind, right? And so, so it was just a long time before anything like that. And so I didn't have the access to all the information that beginning writers could have right now. And there were no other games in town at that time except Harlequin and Silhouette Romance, which were actually the same company. And so I did want to sort of explain a couple things about Romance, for those who might not be too familiar with the genre, there are actually sort of two classifications in romance. Between historical, I mean, that's notwithstanding all the subgenres that there could be. There are series romance, which are the short romances that the difference is that they are in a store. There's 6 of them in a line, or 6 or 8 in a line, and they have a similar tone. They're not the same book, they're not at all the same story, but they have a similar tone. So there might be a line that is romantic suspense, and so every story will be about romantic suspense in that line. There might be desire, there's a desire line, so they're kind of a sexier book. There's the sweeter books, and then there's the Silhouette Special Edition. At the time was the small town, feel good, home and hearth kind of a line. So they were all stories about like that, and that's the line I wanted to write for. Some of my idols wrote for that line, Nora Roberts and Cheryl Woods and other authors I really admired. So the other classification is single title romance, and that's what this book is, a single title romance. And so the difference is, it's all about marketing to the bookstore. So a bookstore will buy 6 or a couple of copies of every one of those 6 books, regardless of who the author is. You know, it's just the deal that they have distribution-wise. Whether it's Walmart or Kmart or whatever, they'll buy a couple copies of each title. So your book gets in the bookstore, great, and gets out there. But single title rises and falls on the author's name and the story. When they're doing the bookstore is doing pre-orders, that's how they determine what's going to go in, who the author is. If it's a big name author, they'll order more. If it's not a big name author, they won't order as many. And so it's your name alone. So it's nice that my name's good there. So that took me a while to get there, because look at the difference in here. Look what getting on the New York Times does too. That's the difference right there. So anyway, back to my story. I wanted to write for Helicon line. There was only the one I wanted to write for was Silhouette Special Edition, and there weren't a lot of options. There was no e-publishing. So anyway, I queried them about it. I sent a query to an editor and said, you know, this is my idea, and she wrote back to me right away, like within a week, and said, I like this idea, send me your entire manuscript. I only had about 5 chapters of this manuscript, because I didn't know that I should have had the whole thing done before I sent her, you know, a query letter. So I went to work, and that's where I learned the next lesson about dreams, that dreams never come true without elbow grease. I worked a full-time job, I had a husband and a baby, I was the news editor at the newspaper. The Herald Journal was an afternoon edition, and I had to be there at 6:30, so I got up at 4 to work, and that's what I did. I wrote from 4 to a couple hours, and then I went to work, and then I came home and took care of my daughter and wrote when she was in bed. And finally I finished that book, I sent it to her, I waited, just certain that the phone was going to ring, and my life was going to change forever. She was going to call me and want it. She did call me, or she did send me a letter saying, I like this book, I'd like to know what else you have. She was a junior editor, and she said, I'm sending it to the senior editor to see if she'll buy it for the line. Send me whatever else you have. So again, so exciting. I thought, my life's going to change. She loved it. I'm sure that the senior editor's going to love it too. So they didn't love it, of course, because my career took a while to take off. So they rejected the first 2 books. And I didn't know what to do. That was the only game in town. What do I do now? They didn't like it, and you couldn't like change it around and send it to another one of their lines. Once they said no, that was kind of it, you know. But if I'd known then what I know now, I would have realized that when she rejected me, it was a great letter. She said, I love your writing style. I love your, I love your writing. I love your style. But these projects don't work for me. And I would have come up with something else. But I took it as a big roadblock, and I didn't write for a long time. So. There's a little side note here. I'm gonna pat myself on the back a little bit. I don't know if it's irony or poetic justice or whatever, but through the different twists and turns in my career, I came back and I've written about 20 books for special edition, the line I originally wanted to write for, that devastated me when they rejected it. And on Amazon you can look, and I'm not saying I do this, I don't do this, but you can look at your ranking, and you can see like the bestseller list. And just for every line, I'll tell you the bestseller list. And 8 of the top 10 special edition bestsellers are my books. So anyway, it comes around. So the lesson I learned from that initial rejection is that sometimes you have to be willing to shift your dreams to something else. That doesn't mean you give them up. It just means you reassess and redirect your efforts. A side lesson to this is trust in yourself. If you believe you have something to offer the world, you can't let anything stand in the way of that, even these demoralizing, devastating rejections that you might face. So after about 6 months of moping around and not doing anything, I finally shook myself off and jumped back into things. I decided to submit to, there was one other game in town, it was Love Swept, Bantam Love Swept, and they had produced some amazing authors, but they didn't sell nearly like the Silhouettes did. They had a very limited distribution, and it was very small, but I thought, well, at least I'll sell a book. And so I submitted to them, and authors that have come out of there, like Iris Johansson came out of Love Swept, Sandra Brown came out of there, Cindy Gerard, Janet Ivanovich came out of Love Swept. So in desperation, I didn't know what else to do, so I submitted my 2 manuscripts to them. And finally, in October of 1995, more than 5 years after we bought that $100 bid sale computer, and I went to work on my first book, I got the call that they wanted to buy the book. Both of the manuscripts the Silhouette had rejected. So at last, my dreams were coming true, right? I was a published author. And to celebrate, my husband and I went to our favorite restaurant at the time. We drove all the way to Layton to go to the Red Lobster. That was like, so which really cracks me up now. Driving all the way to Layton to Red Lobster, but that's what we did. And I remember sitting in the restaurant and thinking, my life is going to change forever now, and it really did. It took a while to change forever, but it really did change. So I continued writing for Love Swept. Meanwhile, my husband and I decided the time was right to add to our family. Am I going on too long? Sorry.
No, keep going.
Okay. We decided the time was right to add to our family. So it was really exciting. I was going to quit my newspaper editor job to write full-time when we had our second child. And I was so excited. I was going to be a new mom. I was going to write novels full-time. And the week I sold my 5th book to Bantam, I also gave birth to our second child. And I learned a little something more about dreams, which is sometimes they're not always as important as you think they are. And when life gets in your way, priorities have to shift. So our son was born with severe disabilities. It required total care. My world became about taking care of him and his needs. And I still had publishing obligations. We had just lost half our income because I'd quit my job for me quitting work, so I had to keep writing. Because of his neurological difficulties, he cried constantly for the first 2 years of his life, unless I was holding him. He wouldn't sleep in his bed, so I slept in a rocking chair most of the time in his room, and rode with this fragile baby on my lap between doctor and physical therapy appointments. So, meanwhile, to add to the overwhelming stress that we already had, my publisher decided they were dropping the Love Swept line. So now I was orphaned, jobless, and I had this baby, and medical bills were coming in. But here's another lesson, that dreams sometimes require an emergency backup plan. Several months before we had our son, I had signed with an agent, and all with the idea that if I was going to make full-time writing my work, if that was going to be my income, I had to write for 2 publishers. I just couldn't do it alone on what I was making from Bantam alone. So I'd already submitted before Love Swept was discontinued. And so it was only a few months that I was orphaned. A few months later, Silhouette contacted me, and I received a contract offer from them. From the editor I still have, 45 books later. We've been together through the whole thing. So I went to work for Silhouette. I went to work hard. I wrote every available moment I could, taking care of our 2 children, including our son, who's now almost 18 and still requires total care and is non-mobile and nonverbal. And we were crazy and added a 3rd child into that mix, and he's been a total delight, but of course that also complicated my writing schedule. And meanwhile, my sales slowly began to build, and my editor, whom I mentioned before, I completely adore, she became the senior editor at Special Edition. I was writing for a different line, and she became the senior editor at this line that I love so much, and I moved with her when she moved. It was now a fit for me. It fit my stories so much better. I wrote romantic suspense for a long time. I didn't love it until I started writing these books that are about small towns and about families and about connections, and that's really when my voice and my career sort of took off. So the next lesson, I'm almost through, grab every opportunity that comes your way. Special Edition had a much wider readership than what I had before, and those are the kind of stories I wanted to write and I loved writing, and once I started there, my career took off exponentially. I had a highly successful series in Special Edition. My Cowboys of Cold Creek loosely connected miniseries. It's still going strong after 13 books. But writer friends started pushing me to write single titles. I was writing these categories, 2 or 3 a year, and they started pushing me to write these bigger books that have a wider distribution, that get in more bookstores, get in places that the other books don't get into. it was really scary. That thrive or die on an author's name alone was a really scary thing to do when I had a really comfortable income coming in from my special editions. But I discovered that my dreams had changed, and originally my dream was to write and sell a romance novel. Then it became being able to make enough income from my writing that I could stay home with my children, and now I started to think bigger. I started to think about getting a bigger readership. And so remember I talked about not being ashamed of your dreams, so I'll admit it to you all. My dream was to hit the New York Times. That's what I wanted, and I'm not ashamed of it. I wanted to hit the New York Times. And so I decided that I would take that jump into single title. And again, I had to relearn all those other lessons I talked about all over again, because it's a different situation. So many different things come into play. This was a really safe, comfortable place to be, and this is not at all a safe, comfortable place. So, you know, they could say your books aren't selling, you're done, you know, at any moment. And so it was a much scarier thing. My first single title proposal was rejected by everybody that my agent sent it to for really completely conflicting reasons. It was 2 category by one, it was 2 women's fiction by another. It was just, what can we do with that? We got different responses from everybody we sent it to. My publisher came to me and said, well, we don't want this, but if you send us a romantic suspense again, we have a hole in our program. We could, you know, we want you to write romantic suspense again. And I said, no, that's not the story that I want to write anymore. So I told him no. And then about less than a year later, the market changed, and small town romances became hugely popular. Robin Carr just was selling everything, and they really took off. And so my publisher actually came to me and said, what do you have that we could put into our single title program? And I had something, fortunately, at the moment, and so I gave them what I had. So I wrote more Hopes Crossing books, and finally, after the 6th book, it hit the New York Times. This one also hit the New York Times, and so it's been a long journey, and it hasn't been an easy journey, and there've been a lot of pitfalls along the way. But as John said, that sign in my office is what keeps me going. I might not change the world, but I could change somebody's afternoon. And think of that when I'm writing. I make people happy, and how many people can say their job makes people happy? And it's a wonderful thing. So anyway, do you have questions for me? Thanks again for being here. Any other questions?
In the beginning of one of your books, you talk about getting together with some friend authors.
Yes.
At the Village Inn, and laughing and wondering if you're going to get kicked out.
Yeah.
This Village Inn?
No, the Village Inn in Salt Lake. They're both in Salt Lake. One's in Park City and one's in Salt Lake. And we have brainstorming sessions there. I don't have my critique group anymore. We sort of moved in different directions, but I get together with some friends to help me brainstorm. That's the hardest part for me, is coming up with plots. After 50 books, I've kind of picked all the low-hanging fruit, and so I need to, you know, reach out and have somebody help me figure out plots on things. And so we get together, not that often, 2 or 3 times a year, but they've been amazingly helpful to me. And it is fun. We do laugh a lot. Anybody else have a question?
So coming up with plots, okay, so I can see you brainstorm and you come up with plots, but it's really cool the way you come up with these interesting phrasings that shouldn't go together, but they do, like just listening now, credit card, like an AK-47, drop kick a psycho, girl fight, bar fight, old boyfriend, girlfriend turn into hot steaming piles of history. Where do these things come from?
I have no idea. And sometimes I think, I reread it, you know, because I turn it into my editor, and then I don't look at it again until she sends me back the copy edited version, and I look at that and I think, I have no recollection of writing that. I don't know where that came from. You know, I think it's like deadline, midnight mania that some of these things come. I don't know. They just do. And it comes from being in the point of view, and you think, well, how would a military guy respond to that situation? And he would say it was like she had an AK-47 and she charges forward, you know. And so that's sort of the mindset that I think about. How would this character, this particular person with all of their backstory and all their history, how would they look at this situation? And then I sort of try to filter that into the story.
You've got some set in western Colorado. Do you go and research the area and get a feel for it, or do you?
No, and I'm sure anybody who lives in Colorado says she doesn't know anything. I just make things up. That's the beauty of fiction, you know. Why fiction is so much better than writing for a newspaper, because I don't have to. I have basic things, you know, when I'm creating. that's why I always create fictional towns, because I can just do whatever I want. I mean, I've created this town in Idaho that is basically like Star Valley, or basically like Ashton, not Star Valley, but like Ashton, and it's just, whatever. I just make it up. Anything else? Anybody else have a question?
How many books have you had on the New York bestseller?
Just these two, my most recent is two. So, well, there was one in between there that didn't hit the list, but the two Christmas books did. So I've had a lot of USA Today bestseller lists, but that is basically on, they take e-sales and everything for that. New York Times has a weird, nobody knows the secret of what gets on the New York Times. It's this big mystery, and it's all about velocity of sales, which you probably are aware of. It's about how many you sell in the first week. That's what puts you on the New York Times. If you sell a lot of books in 1 week, you have a good chance of getting on the New York Times. If you might sell, I've sold more books than my book that hit the New York Times. Like this one was on for 3 weeks. This one sold like a third again more and was only on for 1 week. So who knows? It's just a weird, it's where it sells, it's how it sells, how fast it sells. It's just kind of a weird formula, who knows? But it's cool. Anything else?
My question was how much you map out your characters, your plot, versus just stepping into the character and imagining the moment and just kind of embodying the character in that moment. What's your balance between?
So I start out with a synopsis, which is kind of like just my roadmap. It's usually 8 to 10 pages that tells me these are the events that are going to happen in this story. And then I write a really, really raw first draft. I call it discovery draft is like the nice term, but vomit draft is the not so nice term. It's just where you're throwing everything out there that you want to have happen. It would make no sense to anybody else but me, but usually there's dialogue there. There's some pacing for where the characters would be going. I'll say something cool is going to happen here. I don't know what yet, something like that. So I'll write just a really raw first draft, and then I write a second draft, and that's where I sort of massage all those details and come up with some of the clever wording that I try to put in, and I just fix all the things that I had left blank. That's where the rubber meets the road, really, and that's the stage I'm at in the book right now. It's due in 2 weeks, and I'm just finishing the rough draft. I'm way behind on it because of my husband's broken leg, so.
Could you, Jared?
He's a convenient scapegoat. It's not really his fault, but I'm way behind, so anyway. And then I just do a final draft, and then I do a third draft. So I do 3 drafts of every manuscript. The raw draft, the second sort of structural where I'm fixing most everything, and then the final polished draft is what I call it, where I'm going through and making sure, trying to make the prose sing as much as I can under the limitations of deadline.
Okay, I just want to make sure the students all heard that. 3 drafts of an entire novel, right?
Yeah, but it takes me a long time. I mean, and it's ugly, and it's a painful process. And it's not fun. And I say every day, why do I do this? It's so hard. Because it is. Writing is hard. It's physically and emotionally exhausting. There's just no way around it. It's hard.
Are those 3 drafts all before you submit the first manuscript to your editor?
Well, at this point, yeah, basically. I mean, at this point, that I sell on just the idea of it, and then I just send it to them finally when it's done. And then we go through and polish it again. She'll make some changes, and then the copy editor will go through and make some changes, and she finds like misspellings or something that didn't make sense. I changed the eye color of a character or something like that. I do that quite a bit because I forget what color. So they have green eyes when they had blue. Kellyanne.
Speaking of that, do you keep a series Bible?
I do. Kellyanne is also a writer. She's one of my dear friends, and she was my beading consultant. She made this. Oh no, I wore the other one because I changed. Sorry, I had it on originally. She made me a bracelet. But I do keep a Bible for each series. I write on a Mac, a laptop, and I use Word, but there's a notebook function in Word. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the notebook function in Word, which is like my best friend. And so I have a notebook for every book that is just a file that has different tabs on it, and you can put whatever you want on each tab. You can import pictures, you can do whatever you want. And so I have a notebook for each one that has a copy of the synopsis on it. It has a description of the characters and their main internal and external conflict, what they have to overcome, the series character arc that they have to, come through in the whole journey, and different, a few historical background that I need to know about them and what they look like, that kind of thing. And then I'll have like a page that is all the other characters that show up in the book, so I can keep all those names straight. And then, so I'll have each one of those Bibles separate, and then for each, we call it the Bible in the business, sorry. That was a little obscure probably for those who might not know, that if there's a series that you're writing, they call it a Bible so you can keep track of everything. If you're writing a series with other authors, there's a Bible that lets you keep track of everything, and it's just basically the overview of what the series is about. So I do have that for each book and for each series. Anything else? I'm rambling, I'm sorry. I tend to ramble. Go ahead.
When your editor said that, or that editor said that they wanted your draft and you didn't have it finished, how long did it take you to finish it before you sent it back to her?
I think it took me about 6 or 7 months to finish it. It was I think they have short attention spans, so she had probably forgotten that she ever said, send it to me. But, if you could show them the cover letter at the time, I could show her the cover letter that said, you asked for this. And so I think it took quite a while. And as I look back, it's not my favorite book. You learn a lot after 50 books. My early books, they're okay. And actually, I put them up as ebooks because I have the rights to those. And I did put them up as ebooks because the readers were asking me for those early books. And I reread them, and there were things in there. I was like, that's pretty good for a young person who didn't know anything about life and didn't know anything about writing. There was some good stuff in there, but they're still not my favorites. Anything else? Yes. Yeah.
I went to Hastings half a year, 3/4 of a year ago to find a book of yours. And the woman working in the book section didn't know your name. I said, what do you mean? She lives in this valley.
I'm very low-key, and I like to stay under the radar, which is probably why I haven't had a book signing or book reading before. But yeah, I don't go around to the bookstores too much around here locally. I used to do that when I first started out, and then it just took so much energy, and I put most of my energy to writing the book and online promotion. I'm very active online when it comes to promotion there, but locally I don't do very much. So I should do better. You're right. Yeah.
So is the one you read from your favorite of all the ones you've written?
It's favorite in a different way. People ask me which one is my favorite. It's like saying which kid do you love best, really. You just can't. You love them in different ways. The book I'm working on now is my favorite because that's the one I'm working on right now. So although my husband will say you hate every book until you read it when it's done, and that's probably true. I generally hate every book until I turn it in and say, okay, that wasn't so bad. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was. That's just my neuroses, but I'm sure some of you share that writer neuroses as well.
Okay.
I'm sorry it took so long, but thank you all so much.